Hi everyone, we're Team 17. Today we're discussing a topic you're probably extra familiar with this morning after Team 15's wonderful presentation, and that's networking. Now, whether you see networking as a favorite pastime, or perhaps a bit more likely, a necessary evil, we can all agree that networking is necessary, as well as crucial for achieving our long-term goals, both in our professional and our personal lives. That's why today, my teammates and I are going to discuss 7 key tips we've identified to get the absolute most out of your networking efforts. Now, when we first started discussing networking as a team, we soon realized that for each of us, our biggest networking moments came when we leaned into the 7 tips we're going to share with you today. For me personally, that big networking win came when I was a recent undergrad and looking for my first job out of school. Now, I'd just gone back to the States from a trip and had a short few weeks before Thanksgiving. If your family is anything like mine, then you know that means it was crunch time. I either find a job or get to explain to each of my grandparents just exactly what I'm planning to do with my life. Wanting to avoid the latter option at all costs, I delved heavy into the recruiting world, the point where I swear I was reciting elevator pitches in my sleep. Even still, despite all the hard work and time I was sinking into recruiting, it wasn't until I leaned into my network that I actually unearthed the opportunity that would eventually become my job. This opportunity arose one night when I actually shirked recruiting responsibilities and agreed to go to a local concert with my dad and some of his friends and neighbors. To be honest, I was not very familiar with this group, minus the fact that I'd seen that the neighbor across the street drove a company car on which I'd seen the engineering company's logo. I was curious, so I looked up the engineering company, and to my surprise, it seemed that they might have some potential overlap between what they do and my undergrad degree, which was architectural engineering. Unfortunately, when I discussed with that neighbor later that evening, it soon became clear that whatever he did had absolutely no relation to what I was trying to do. Even still, I continued to talk to him casually throughout the night, and over time discovered 2 things. One, this neighbor didn't actually understand what an architectural engineering degree meant, and 2, one of the newly started departments at his firm actually had quite a bit of overlap with what I was trying to do. I left it at that, and we went on to enjoy the concert. Believe it or not, San Antonio does actually have some live music. But then I followed up with him the next day. He was gracious enough to set up a one-on-one meeting with me and that department head, and by the end of the next week, I had a job offer. Simply by leaning into my network and some of the tips you're about to hear, I was able to not only find an opportunity that eventually become my career, but also was able to avoid lying to my grandma at Thanksgiving and tell her I was considering going to law school. So with that in mind, I'm gonna go ahead and turn it over to Suda, and she's gonna share the first of her 7 key tips.
Thank you, Kyle. Research attendees and come prepared. The best impressions are the ones that appear effortless. Approaching others too aggressively and not paying proper attention to people and conversations around you can have a negative effect. Come prepared with questions so you can learn more about others and hold mutually interesting conversations in which you share information about yourself and your business when appropriate. Kyle demonstrated this well when he researched his father's friend's company before going to the event. Now on to Frank for tip number 2.
Thank you, Sudha. For the second networking tip, we'll be talking about not having a set agenda. Networking is about developing relationships that are mutually beneficial. So try your best not to sell. You're not there to do business. You're there to make valuable contacts and to exchange information. A good example of this networking tip at play was during Kyle's concert, where casual conversation not only improved his professional network, but eventually led to a job offer. Your agenda should be to talk to a set number of people, and the objective is to get their business cards, which could eventually lead to future business opportunities. Networking is just but the first step in a long dance, so try your best to avoid sales pitches or business propositions. Next, I'll invite James to share tip number 3.
Thank you, Frank. Tip number 3, listen and show you are listening. One of the surest ways to make a poor impression is to make others feel unheard, even when we don't intend to. When we focus more on what we have to say and less on understanding others, we can leave a bad impression, which goes against what we're trying to do when networking. Instead, when you're in a small group, first take time to understand the conversation and the ideas being shared and the people taking part in the conversation. When it is your opportunity to speak, focus on making a contribution that moves the conversation forward. That way, you show that 1, you are a good listener, and 2, you show that you know how to make a connection between what matters to others and what you have to offer. Kyle, in his story, displayed this very well when he first took the time to get an understanding of his neighbor's expertise in engineering or lack thereof, and the opportunities at his neighbor's company before inserting his own ideas. Speaking of which, I'll turn it over to Kyle for tip number 4.
Thanks, James. So tip number 4 is building genuine connections. We're all guilty of it. Sometimes when we get fixated on networking, it can be pretty tempting to forget that the person in front of you is still a person, instead of just a means to achieve your long-term goals. However, falling for that trap can be detrimental to getting the most out of your networking connections. Think back to that story I shared earlier. If I'd simply seen my dad's neighbor as a route to a job, I probably would have given up on talking to him as soon as I learned that his department couldn't really help me. However, instead, I continued to talk to him throughout the night, and with that, built a genuine personal connection. By building that connection, I was able to learn more about him and his company, as well as share more about myself and some of my strengths. With that, we were able to find overlap between the two that probably otherwise would have remained undiscovered. By building a genuine personal connection with the person I was trying to network with, I was able to both create and capitalize on new opportunity, as well as create a new friendship that I ended up carrying into my new workplace. So with that, I'm gonna go ahead and turn over to Frank to discuss tip number 5.
Thank you, Kyle. For the fifth networking tip, we'll be talking about how to be helpful within your network. Networking is a powerful way to build business connections and to add value within both new and existing networks. At all times, you want to be authentic, you want to ask questions, and try to start every conversation hoping to learn something new. An easy way of implementing this tip effectively is by asking yourself two simple questions. How can I be of help, or how can I be of value to others? Something as simple as offering to make a helpful introduction goes a long way in leaving a positive impression and will more than often lead to long-term relationships. Remember that the true value of networking is not in grade, but rather in generosity. The more you give, the more you're going to get out of it. And next, I'm going to pass it on to James, share tip number 6.
Thanks again, Frank. Tip number 6, follow up immediately. Relationships take work. Specifically, they take thoughtfulness and follow through. So soon after you meet someone, ideally the next day, take the time to email, call, or where appropriate, text them. When you do get in contact with them, build on the things that you all have in common, particularly the most recent interaction. Be specific about what you hope to accomplish in the relationship, offering an idea for another touch point or sharing some pertinent information to their interests. Kyle, in his story, did this very well by reaching out to his neighbor the following day, thanking him for the insight that he shared and reminding him of the agreed upon next step. Katie, on to you for number 7.
Thank you, James. So even in the craziness that is 2020, the tips that we just described will still all apply. That being said, I'm going to provide a few tips specifically as they relate to networking in the virtual environment. So the first tip would be to drop your usual greeting. Under normal circumstances, reaching out to somebody with a simple greeting like, "How are things?" and "I hope you're well" would be fine. But these days, hardly anybody's fine, right? 10 million Americans have contracted COVID-19, and nearly everybody knows somebody that's been seriously impacted by the virus. Experts say notes should display kindness and authenticity. A note to somebody in your network might not even mention anything about a job or an opportunity. It could simply just be reaching out, hoping that they're safe and happy, and sending good thoughts their way. Notes like that will pay off in the long run, as your network will always remember you as somebody that truly cared when times were tough. The second tip would be to take networking from face-to-face in person to face-to-face virtually. This means that networkers should set up video chats to actually see one another. Video calls can make it easier to establish genuine connections and come across as authentic, especially when you're meeting somebody for the first time. I think that we've all done a coffee chat over the phone recently. And when you don't see that person face to face, you feel like that they're never going to remember you and that it wasn't the best use of your time. So to be safe, give yourself an extra few minutes to set up your video and make sure that your audio works, so you're not trying to fumble through that during your allotted time to speak, and it'll make you flustered if it's not working correctly. The third tip is to be more patient. So everybody's jobs and lives were upended, and those that are still working are likely doing double duty to hold down their jobs. So spread out your nudging to accommodate other people's schedules. As with anything this age, your approach needs to be different. Networkers should go in with modest expectations that people will get back to them in a week or less, rather than 1 to 2 days as previous. So to wrap it all up, networking is a valuable tool that we should all be mindful of developing. Building personal connections can truly alter the course of a career, and following the steps that we noted could alter your career track, expand your industry knowledge, and allow you to help others. While we presented in this particular order, please keep in mind that each of these tips have different importance in different contexts. So on behalf of Team 17, thank you all so much and happy networking.